Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm testing. If anyone cannot hear me or see the slides on their screen, can you please send me a message so that we can get it fixed? All right, welcome to the first Ask the Dietitian webinar after our summer break. I'm Janelle Smith, the registered dietitian consulting for the Celiac Disease Foundation, and I'm going to be happily walking you through lots of tips and advice for helping your kids or helping yourself go back to school this fall. Definitely our needs change as we grow. There are many different kind of situations that come up in all ages. So we're going to talk about all stages of life from preschool all the way to college. So starting in preschool and kindergarten, when children are younger, definitely parent involvement is going to be very high. Parents need to be highly involved to help advocate for their children's needs. A lot of preschools are private, and so they may not be required to provide gluten-free foods. So it is possible that parents will actually want to provide their own meals and snacks for their children. But definitely talk to your preschool before choosing a preschool to figure out what level of understanding they have and what they're able to provide, if they are able to provide a separate preparation space for your child's snacks, and some other considerations that we'll talk about. So to make sure that your child's needs are met, we do recommend providing a doctor's note explaining the diagnosis of celiac disease, what the condition is, why it's so important to be on a strict gluten-free diet, that regardless of the symptoms that your child has, very small amounts of gluten will affect their long-term health and growth and brain development. But definitely advise, preschools and, lower education of what your child's symptoms are so that they can notify you whenever your child does have symptoms and talk about what you would do in those situations. Definitely whenever parents are not able to be in the facility, we know that mistakes will happen. And luckily, in the case of celiac disease, we don't have a sudden anaphylactic risk. But it's definitely important to prevent those mistakes from happening on a regular basis. So a couple ideas of things to talk about is definitely ask for staff monitoring at meal times and like craft project times to make sure that kids aren't putting any gluten-containing items in their mouth. This might mean having your child at a wheat-free table, or just making sure that there are no craft products that contain wheat that are around, or just to make sure that the child doesn't put anything in their mouth. I like the idea of providing a placemat with the child's name to designate a clean space, kind of a gluten-free space that the child knows to only eat what's on their placemat and not from any other area, any other kids' snack boxes or lunch boxes or any other snacks. Definitely be aware that there could be gluten in things like dry pasta that might be used for craft projects or other learning projects. Play-Doh definitely almost always contains gluten. Face paint or finger paint could contain gluten, and even things like sand trays, depending on how young or developmentally where your child is at, if they're still putting sand in their mouth. In terms of nutritional needs for your child at this age, trust your child's ability to feed themselves other than gluten. Children are really intuitive eaters. They typically eat when hungry and stop when full. And while it might look like their variety is very limited, if you observe a child over a long period of time, they actually really tend to self-regulate and make sure that they get a balanced diet. Know that food aversion is really common in children that are diagnosed at a young age. Just from the association of eating a food and feeling terrible, children often, don't enjoy food or don't enjoy certain textures or associate certain foods with feeling sick. So know that it's pretty normal for celiac children to be picky eaters. Focus on the foods that he or she likes. give them time to grow out of this stage, and don't be too overly concerned, because generally when we try to force children to eat things they don't eat or they don't want to eat, they react with resistance and defiance, and then we get into a power struggle. Another tip is to make meal times really fun and enjoyable. Encourage your children to try new foods, but don't force it, which can lead to a power struggle or just a negative feeling around meal times. You may choose to work with an occupational or behavioral therapist as well if you and your pediatrician determine that there is a feeding problem. Many children at this age, if they're diagnosed at this age, do need to catch up on their growth. And so weight gain techniques might be necessary. Definitely most weight gain supplements like Pediasure are gluten-free and lactose-free as well. You may be using whole milk longer than many children drink whole milk. You can also add fats, heart-healthy fats and brain-healthy fats like coconut oil, nut butters, those unsaturated oils. I would also recommend liquid vitamins at this point, or you could do gummy vitamins, but often liquid vitamins are better absorbed in a celiac child. And if you're using weight gain supplements like whole milk, there's a higher risk for iron deficiency anemia, which celiac children already have a risk of. So you may definitely need to supplement with iron, and talk with your pediatrician and possibly a dietitian about making sure that your child's nutritional needs are met. So when it comes to elementary school, whether it's public or private schools, I guess public schools primarily, we recommend filing a 504 plan. Many parents think, oh, this isn't necessary. My child doesn't have a learning disability or a drastic physical disability. But we do recommend that a 504 plan be in place just so that to preempt any disputes that might come up with the school in the future. For an example of a model 504 plan, a lot of schools have their own, but we have some suggestions adapted from the American Celiac Disease Alliance available at celiac.org/ask. So when thinking about developing your 504 plan, which is basically just a document that is agreed upon between parents and school administration, this ensures that all of your child's needs have to be met throughout the school year. Your school nurse may end up creating an individualized nursing plan if needed. Be sure to include that your child might need something like a bathroom pass at last minute notice, that they shouldn't be denied having to go to the bathroom, especially if it's an emergency. If they're having tummy aches or fatigue, they may need time laying down in the school nurse office. I definitely recommend making sure that your child has a gluten-free emergency kit with non-perishable items. You may also want to provide a backup lunch if your school nurse can accommodate that with non-perishable items, so that if there's any situation where you're expecting your child to have a gluten-free lunch and something goes wrong, your child always has something to eat in the school. You may also want to provide backup underwear or pants if your child ever has GI accidents, or clothes if your child ever vomits from an exposure. You may need to talk about absence excusal and if additional absences can be excused as needed if there's a physical, a health need. And if a learning needs assessment or independent study contract is necessary, don't feel ashamed or hesitant to do that. Your child's needs should be taken seriously for the reason of celiac disease. I would also always recommend, whether or not you have a 504 plan, to talk with your child's teacher and any classroom aides that are working in the classroom. Make sure that they're aware of what your child's symptoms are from accidental exposure to gluten. Ask for them to notify you in advance of all class parties and field trips or any games that they do that include food prizes or anything like Play-Doh. Ask them to keep an eye out for any social problems like bullying or teasing. Your teachers and your school are required to keep everything confidential in terms of your child's health needs. So it's really up to you and your child how comfortable you are sharing those needs publicly. But bullying or teasing about food intolerance or celiac disease is never acceptable. Explain why your child might have a bathroom pass. You might want to give your child's teacher some non-perishable goodies for, if there are those games that are occurring in the class, or if there's ever like a last minute party in a classroom that they can't give notice for. And I definitely recommend volunteering for, room mom, room dad, or the parent teacher association to make sure that events and other things at your school are accommodating for your child's gluten-free needs. Here's some tips for just making sure that cross contact does not occur at school, especially in elementary school. Advise your school that your child shouldn't be exposed to classroom activities with loose flour. So things like baking, sometimes, kids or classes will use loose flour to make like stress balls or different like science experiments. So loose flour can definitely be inhaled and your child shouldn't need to be exposed to it. Talk with your child about washing hands before lunchtime, not swapping snacks with friends. It's very common practice for kids to compare what they're eating to their peers at lunch and for kids to have fun trying each other's food. But make sure your child knows that they need to eat only what's in their lunchbox, unless as your child gets older, they get really good at label reading. But elementary school is definitely the right time to start teaching your child about label reading. If they're starting to read, you can actually practice reading from food labels for simple words like oats or wheat or malt. Some simpler things on the gluten-free label to look out for is, if it says gluten-free on the front or the back, and the allergy statement that says contains wheat, those are pretty easy, good first steps for kids to start learning reading labels. Note that while schools are getting better at providing gluten-free meals, legally your school food service must provide an equal gluten-free meal that is safe from cross-contamination if your child has a disability, and celiac disease is considered a disability. And this is all ensured by filing a 504 plan. So if you meet any resistance from your school, I would definitely encourage you to look into this further. Make sure that the 504 plan, like I said, includes that cross-contamination must be prevented. You might want to, in our model plan, there's some suggestions of wording of how that can be communicated. Gluten-free bread and other gluten-free starches should be included in every meal to make sure that all food groups are met. That's part of National School Food Service guidelines. And your child should not be provided just a piece of chicken and fruit and vegetables. And there should be a way for them to identify students that need the gluten-free meal, possibly a special sticker or pass that the child turns in to school food service. Definitely inclusion and normalization is really important for helping your child socially. And the reality is that your child is different than their peers and that can be a painful experience. But there are definitely ways that you can help ease this experience. I would definitely suggest bringing gluten-free treats if it's allowed to share with the whole class, to show peers that gluten-free is not weird or bad. Gluten-free tastes just like everything else nowadays. I would encourage your child to potentially educate their class on celiac disease, such as for a school project or presentation. This really gives your child a way to use their voice and empowers them to really own their situation as not different in a bad way, but different in an interesting and fun way. So empower your child to talk about their needs. The more ashamed or shy your child is about it, the more likely they are to accidentally eat gluten or to not assert their needs when they're confronted with gluten containing foods by their peers or by adults. Joining a support group is just such an excellent way, or attending a gluten-free camp is so wonderful just to provide that sense of normalcy for your child. And you can find a list of support groups at celiac.org/get involved. You may want to start a support group if there's not one in your area as well. And I recommend always, giving your friends, parents, some frozen meals or snacks to keep in their house so that you don't have to think about it every time your child goes over there. If parents are uncomfortable or nervous about providing a gluten-free meal for your child, give them the meal to have on hand to make it easy for them. So some ideas for making a kid-friendly gluten-free lunchbox. Sometimes kids feel left out because they don't have the regular brands that their friends have, or their food looks different, or it falls apart, or it doesn't taste like it used to taste. So there are different ways that we can make lunches fun for our kids. I love these little divided Tupperware containers that kind of mimic the school lunch packaged products that are available, and you can actually make them a lot healthier than a lot of the packaged products that are available on the market. You can make it super colorful, create a variety, include a variety of fruits, vegetables, sauces that include every different color and make it fun for your kids. Say you're eating the rainbow. And by the way, they get just such a nice variety of nutrients by including the whole rainbow of colored foods. On our website, there's lots of different recipes for sneaking in nutritious foods, such as pizza sauce that contains a variety of vegetables, smoothies that contain spinach and flax, foods that your kid might be resistant to eat if they know what they're eating. We always recommend some really great products from our sponsors that are just so supportive for the gluten-free community. I love Udi's pizza crusts. We can always cut them up into smaller little pizza crusts for your kid to make their own mini pizzas at school. I like Rudy's tortilla wraps that I like wraps for school lunches because they tend not to fall apart as much as gluten-free breads in the lunchbox. Glutino English muffins can also do a nice mini pizza or sandwich. Enjoy Life has a ton of allergen-free products if your child has more than one food exclusion. I love Lucy's cookies that have a nice nutritious whole grain base for their products that add in some more nutrition. And then I love that Betty Crocker, Bisquick, and Chex now have so many gluten-free products that look the same as what other kids are eating and taste very much the same. That can help your kid feel really normal. So look out for these recipes on celiac.org/ask. We have that loaded pizza sauce recipe with tons of vegetables. We have tips for making baked goods out of bean flour, which is just full of fiber and minerals and B vitamins. So much more nutritious than the starches and white rice flour that are in many of these products available on the market. You can sneak vegetables into zucchini muffins. Overnight oats are a really quick idea for enjoying, getting out the door quick in the morning. Some pretzel crusted chicken strips and breakfast quiche cups are available on our website. All right, let's transition to middle and high school. So children are growing up, we're preteens and teenagers. This is where I'll call them teens. This is where teens really need to start taking control and ownership of their own health needs, which, a lot of times parents are highly involved if a child is diagnosed in this age range. But I definitely encourage teaching your child to be involved in their own health needs. In terms of talking with the school, be sure to, again, file a 504 plan, even if you feel like, oh, my child doesn't really ever need special accommodations. You never know what will come up or what kind of resistance you might meet from certain teachers or staff members. You may need to talk to the school psychologist to make them aware, the school nurse. Make sure the homeroom teacher is who you primarily speak with. Also include any extracurricular leaders, a chorus director or a basketball team coach. We need to make sure that everyone in your child's community is aware of their needs. Make sure that your child has access to gluten-free food in the classroom and cafeteria, that they may be excused from activities that use gluten-containing foods. So again, the loose flour is not a situation that celiacs should really be exposed to. So home ec or any food science classes, teens should be excluded from that or excused from that. Make sure that cross-contamination is prevented in school food service. You may ask that a microwave is available to heat personal meals. And again, bathroom privileges might be necessary. So here's some tips with dealing with lunch and other social events in middle and high school. And again, this is an age where socially, we celiacs can tend to feel so different and isolated. But it's time for teens to, get proficient at reading labels, to take more responsibility, involve a dietitian to meet with your teen individually if they have resistance to listening to you as an authority figure. We should avoid salad bars that have croutons and other crunchies or unlabeled salad dressings or flavored nuts. We need to ask questions of school food service, avoid anything without an ingredients list. Make sure that chips and other snack foods are labeled gluten-free. I find that a lot of naturally gluten-free items like fruits and vegetables don't necessarily need to be labeled gluten-free as long as we know that they are gluten-free and naturally gluten-free. But things like potato chips, granola bars, protein bars, any baked good, it really needs to be labeled gluten-free to make sure it's not cross-contaminated. Be sure to bring your own dish, maybe potluck style, to team dinners, birthday parties, and friends' houses, and encourage your teen to keep a backup snack in their backpack or their locker, or if they're in their car, if they're starting to drive already. I got one question so far that says, does the microwave need to be isolated for gluten-free use or only just cleaned out? It's definitely adequate just to clean the microwave and make sure that there's no food falling down onto your gluten-free food. It's not necessary to have a dedicated microwave. So we have some great suggestions for brown bag lunches. I love Nature Valley and No-G bars that are easy for your teen to, keep when they're on the go. Frito-Lay has many different gluten-free labeled chip and snack products. Again, I love those Rudy's tortilla wraps. Char also makes really nice baguettes and multigrain bread that stay nice and fresh and fluffy. I highly recommend following us on Instagram and Facebook, or having your teen do so. We post so many easy recipes and ideas created by young adults who are interning in our office. So you can follow us at Celiac Disease Foundation on both of these platforms for tons of recipes. All right, now moving on to college. For parents, this is often a time where it's for the first time they're more hands-off. Their baby's going off to school, and for young adults, it may be the first time that they're really preparing all their food for themselves. So choosing a college is really the first step to making sure that you as a young adult are going to be safe and make everything as easy as possible. Um, when looking at schools, you definitely want to tour the dining halls if you're going on a tour of the school, and there's no harm in always asking to speak with the manager of dining services and ask a bunch of questions about their dining halls to see if they can accommodate gluten-free eating. So you definitely want dining halls that have dedicated prep areas and gluten-free products. A lot of dining halls these days have gluten-free breads and cereals and tortillas. Some even have a separate dining hall just for gluten-free food. So definitely not every college can be as accommodating or is as accommodating as these places, but you can definitely find them nowadays. It's also really helpful to have allergen labels on every dish that's in the dining hall. You also want to look at the local restaurants in the area because um, that's where everyone's going to be hanging out outside of class hours. So check that there are actually restaurants with gluten-free menus and gluten-free options. And you also want to notice the on-campus dining that's often run separately from the dining halls. Make sure that there are gluten-free options there. I was doing a little internet search and found that there's actually several different lists of schools that are really accommodating for gluten-free. One of these sites was bestcollegesonline.com. So I definitely recommend checking those out when searching for a school. Now, there definitely is precedent that schools need to provide accommodations to those with celiac disease. Depending on how much of a crusader you are, you may end up going to a school that does not have accommodations yet. And so one situation you might come in is to decide to live in the dorms or not to live in the dorms. When making this decision, you want to look, is the dining hall accommodating? Can you even waive the dining hall fee? A lot of times if you live in the dorms, you have to pay for the dining hall. And if there are not accommodations, that may not be a good use of your money. Some dorms actually have kitchenettes or have room for a fridge and a microwave, and you may be able to supplement what your dining hall offers. So keep those in mind when making that decision. When dining in a dining hall, definitely, again, avoid salad bars that have, croutons in the middle of the salad bar. Make sure it's completely off to the side. Any unlabeled salad dressings. Be sure that scrambled eggs are actually real eggs and don't have any pancake batter or filler that contains gluten. And you also want it to not be cooked on the same surface as pancakes or other gluten-containing foods. Never share a toaster, a communal toaster that's in a dining hall. If your school doesn't provide a dedicated gluten-free toaster, which you certainly can ask for, bring toaster bags, which are these little plastic bags that you can actually put right into the toaster and protects your gluten-free bread from being contaminated. Definitely choose individual condiment packets or squeeze bottles and don't use any condiments that are out in a large serving dish just with a shared knife. And you want to avoid any cereal or bulk bins that are potentially shared with gluten-containing foods. What I've found just from being on college campuses myself is that sometimes you can put together a makeshift meal or snacks from different convenience stores or on-campus dining options. Cheese sticks, hard-boiled eggs, yogurt, fruit, carrots and celery, peanut butter, just mixed nuts, and plain potato chips are often available if anyone is really in a pickle. So let's talk about social life and the freshman 15, which are definitely going to be kind of new and evolving issues as a celiac. I recommend always eating actually before going out if you're not sure that there will be gluten-free options. There's nothing worse than feeling stranded out out in the middle of nowhere, which seems like a food desert when you're at a restaurant that you're really not sure there will be gluten-free options, or if you're not comfortable in that group, asking a lot of questions of, the restaurant. I always bring a snack bar in my purse. Guys, you could definitely fit one in your pocket. And let's talk, definitely be sure to educate yourself about alcohol once you're of drinking age. Um, no malted beverages or beer. So no Mike's Hard Lemonade or other malted beverages. Definitely no beer unless it's labeled gluten-free beer is okay. But all hard liquors that are distilled are gluten-free. Be sure not to drink cider or gluten-free beer that's from a shared tap or a keg, as this is a really big opportunity for cross-contamination. Definitely if you're out in a bar or at a party, choose bottles or cans whenever possible. And drinking games are definitely a chance for cross-contamination in terms of alcohol. So things with shared cups or balls that are thrown in and out of cups, make sure that your gluten-free alcohol is not being contaminated by regular gluten-containing alcohol. In terms of avoiding the freshman 15, I recommend, at this time, a lot of young adults are staying up much later than normal, and their schedule is, a lot more wacky. So often late night eating becomes kind of excessive or becomes a source of weight gain. So in these cases, if you are up late studying or socializing, be sure to spread out your meals so that it doesn't become an additional meal on top of all of your regular food intake. Definitely be wary of liquid calories, things like smoothies and sodas, alcohol as well, and flavored coffee drinks. A lot of times consumption of these goes way up in college and contributes to the freshman 15. And definitely stay active, enroll in intramural sports or dance classes or Zumba classes, things that are social that keep you active. Maybe a lot of people, stop the sports that they used to play or the activities that they used to do in high school. And that can definitely affect the freshman 15. And we actually at Celiac Disease Foundation have just a great opportunity to create a university chapter on your college campus. So I would highly recommend this. I myself started a gluten-free club on my campus and brought together people who are just so grateful to socialize with others. By doing this, you can really get a ton of leadership experience, gain a lot of experience and skills networking with others, going through the process of establishing an organization. As a CDF University chapter leader, you would attend the national conference that's once a year in California, and you have the opportunity to connect with leaders in the gluten-free community and to network with others, maybe outside of the college campus that can help sponsor your club. So find out more about starting a CDFU chapter at celiac.org/get involved. Here's some great examples of easy dorm food that can be used, maybe for late night occasions when the dining hall is closed, or in the instance that you don't have a dining hall that offers a ton of gluten-free options. Progresso has a ton of gluten-free soups now that can be just heated up in a microwave. Explore Asian has great microwavable noodle soups, and these products are really high in protein, actually a really balanced meal just in a cup. Amy's has fantastic frozen meals like burritos and Asian meals and Mexican meals, and I highly recommend their products. And gluten-free Chex has a really cool new granola mix that would be easy to make a yogurt parfait with. And finally, as a college student, we have an excellent internship program that you're available to participate in out in California. Please see us at celiac.org/internship if you're interested in finding out more to gain hands-on experience and earn college credit for becoming involved in the gluten-free community. And for many more recipes and easy to prepare foods for young adults, I recommend youngandglutenfree.com, which is our intern program, or is produced by our intern program. I got one new question asking about distilled liquor made from grains, as well as gluten removed or gluten reduced beers. So to date, the research shows that distilled liquor, even if it's made from a grain, does not contain any gluten. A lot of people report symptoms from consuming liquor and use this as the basis that it must contain some gluten. So to date, the research shows that it's not actually gluten that is making people sick in these liquors, and that alcohol is definitely an irritant, or perhaps there's some other component in the liquor that is making that person sick. So it is safe in terms of celiac disease. If someone has a negative reaction to those liquors, it's fine to avoid them. We just know that we can recommend them as safe in terms of celiac disease. In terms of gluten-removed beers, we don't actually have any research that can prove that these beers don't contain any gluten. The current testing for gluten-free foods is not accurate when a product is fermented. So all beer is fermented, and fermentation kind of chops up the gluten proteins into pieces that look different than they are when they're in a gluten-free food. And so the tests we have just are not accurate for beers yet. Certain beer companies are saying that they have the research that shows that it's gluten-free, but they haven't published this yet. So, it could be that they are gluten-free. We just don't know as of yet. So I personally do not drink them just until we can find out more. All right. Another question, would you allow kids to play with gluten noodles in the classroom? If my child were old enough to not put anything in their mouth and to know to wash their hands after playing with an uncooked gluten-containing noodle, that would be acceptable. Just from touching gluten, we can't absorb gluten through our skin, but we can from inhaling gluten. So as long as a gluten is not airborne, it is safe to touch. Now the issue is for very young children, especially preschool, kindergarten, it's almost impossible to monitor this and to make sure that they're washing their hands and not putting it in their mouth or joking around with the other kids and chewing on it because it's a noodle. So I would be very cautious in young children, and I would ask the teacher not to have gluten-containing noodles for crafts and other projects. There's a question about skincare and beauty products and gluten in these items. Again, if someone is able to make sure that the skin products are not, or other cosmetics or personal care products are not being swallowed, there's no evidence that we're at risk for absorbing the gluten. And it's not possible to absorb gluten through skin. A lot of people do report symptoms from using these products, and so there definitely needs to be more research. My personal suspicion is that there's other components in these products that are allergenic and that causes those symptoms. But there's physically no way for these products to be absorbed through the skin. So only in the case of very young children, some people, just because they don't feel comfortable feeling like, oh, well, I touched my skin or my mouth all day long. If you feel at risk of potentially swallowing a product, it's certainly smart to avoid it. I had one question about what kind of precautions should be taken in the lunchroom. And I think some of these precautions depend on the age of your child. I might recommend a dedicated placemat for your child if they're very young to make sure that the area is clean. If the table can't be wiped down before meals, but you could definitely ask that teachers wipe down tables before your child eats. Um, but also, a clean placemat could be a good replacement for that. Um, Let me know if you're asking about precautions in preparing the food or if you just mean at meal times. Okay, another great question regarding cross-contamination. If a utensil is used on a gluten product and then washed and rinsed thoroughly, is it safe to use for your gluten-free items? Yes, it is. Washing with soap and rinsing with water is enough to remove gluten. Definitely things that are not easily cleaned, like colander strainers or baking items like whisks are so hard to get all the little particles off of. Sometimes wood spoons that have a lot of nooks and crannies. Um, but in terms of general food process, um, techniques like in a school food service lunchroom. They mostly use, metal products that are easily cleaned, and they should thoroughly sanitize the product and make sure there's no gluten products left over. But I personally, share a kitchen with other non-celiacs, and we use the same utensils and pots and pans, and it hasn't been a problem for me. Just reading through some of these questions. Let's see. Okay, I had a question about the different types of labeling um, that we're all seeing on our gluten-free products. There's the difference between a label that has, a logo like a circle with a GF in the middle of it, or, a wheat that's crossed out, across through the center of a wheat. Or sometimes you just see in really small print gluten-free at the bottom of the ingredients label. And this is very confusing for consumers. I agree, because if you see two products at the grocery store, one says gluten-free on the front and the other one says it in teeny tiny letters, you might feel more confident with the one that is more forthcoming about the gluten-free label. Basically, there are, and actually we're going to release a really comprehensive labeling guide for another resource for you all on our website. That essentially a company does not need a specific label. So whether it is a specific logo or it's just the words gluten-free, whatever company is producing that product is able to brand it however they want. Now, there are a couple different certification programs that have their own trademarked logo, and that means exactly what that company intends it to mean. So there are a couple different programs that, do the third party kind of random testing and ensuring that the company has processes and procedures in place to prevent cross contamination. And I recommend, looking into those programs further if you want to know specifically what they guarantee. But essentially, um, the USDA actually released a study recently that showed that whether or not an item was certified gluten-free versus just stating gluten-free on the package, upwards of 95% of products are testing gluten-free. So at this point, there's no requirement to have a certain certification program, and I'm not sure that there's a benefit other than peace of mind for the consumer. But there are definitely mistakes made by these certification programs as well. They're not foolproof. All right, another parent asked, how do How do we deal with schools that downplay the celiac disease? And this can be such a frustrating situation where you have informed yourself, you know how important it is to your child, and frankly, a lot of people are dismissing it as a trend or not a big deal. I hate the question that people ask me, what happens to you if you eat gluten? Are you going to die? And if I say no, all of a sudden they don't take it seriously. Definitely filing a 504 plan is the best way to prevent them from downplaying the disorder. And providing a doctor note that really explains all of the serious complications would be just excellent. So hopefully through filing the 504 plan, first of all, you have legal protection that if your school doesn't accommodate your needs, there's actually grounds for legal action. And to make sure that your child has their needs met, but also just by outlining how serious the issue is and all the accommodations that need to be made, you'll actually be educating school administration and teachers and other adults that may be downplaying it because they actually are uninformed. They have no idea. They didn't understand it was an autoimmune disorder. They thought it was just an intolerance like lactose intolerance. So you can really use the 504 plan as an education tool as well as a safety net for you. I always recommend talking with them, with courtesy and respect. I don't think that threats, really get anyone anywhere, but definitely be assertive for your child's needs. And if they aren't being met, speak with people higher up on the totem pole to make sure that your child's needs are met. I have another question asking if a celiac should be concerned about organic versus non-organic meat products. And in terms of organic, there's no overlap with gluten-free. So organic is its own designation in terms of how the food was produced and grown. And in terms of meat, it's about how the animal was fed, primarily fed, and also some other antibiotic procedures. So any meat is going to be naturally gluten-free. It doesn't matter if the cow ate a ton of gluten while they were alive or if they were only grass-fed. The meat itself is gluten-free because our body, any animal, when it consumes gluten, it breaks that food down into smaller pieces and reassembles them into proteins. So it's not necessary to choose organic versus non-organic. That's really a different type of health choice for you. I have another question about restaurants that are advertising gluten-free menus. Let's see. A lot of servers and managers don't take you seriously when you say you have celiac disease. I have experienced this myself. It is so frustrating. I live in Los Angeles, and I can tell you everyone and their mother is on a gluten-free diet. And then, they pick up a piece of bread and eat it while they say how they're eating gluten-free, which makes it very confusing for restaurants, honestly. So definitely know that the FDA's definition of gluten-free is recommended to apply to restaurants and food service, but right now there's no legal requirement. Basically, food service is regulated on a local level, so cities and states make those rules. So some establishments like, Boston, Massachusetts has more regulations for their allergen labeling in food service. But just because a restaurant states that their menu is gluten-free doesn't necessarily mean that it's gluten-free. So I always ask questions whether or not it's a gluten-free menu or not. I always ask, a restaurant manager or even the chef or the kitchen manager about, do they know what gluten is? I can't tell you how many restaurant managers have said, oh, it's gluten-free, it doesn't contain dairy. And I'm thinking, okay, so I don't think you know what gluten means. So definitely ask a lot of questions. I'm personally more comfortable with corporations that have a gluten-free menu. because I know that they have a legal department that has hopefully looked into it. But I never assume anything as of now, and it's definitely a huge area of growth that we can tackle as a celiac community. Let's see, just waiting to see if we have any other questions. Really great questions today. All right, if anyone has any other questions, you can find my email address at celiac.org/ask. And this webinar will actually be downloaded and uploaded later at celiac.org/webinars. And go ahead and check out my newest blog entry for all the different resources that I mentioned in this webinar. And I hope everyone has a fantastic back to school and a great school year. Thanks.